Welcome to the Sex Reimagined Podcast, where sex is shame-free and pleasure-forward. Let's get into the show.
Welcome. We are so blessed and so thrilled and so excited to have Joanna Shakti with us today. She is the soul love mentor and the founder of Ecstatic Intimacy. She is smart, sexy, and a little bit spicy. Her passion is warm, playful style, entertain, and inspire. So, no other person on the planet possesses the experience, expertise, and ability to transform lives in quite the way Joanna does. So, we are so excited to get to hear about this. From what I understand, Joanna really brings a lot of different things into her work with her clients. Really powerful. So, she leads singles and couples who hunger for deeper love and more intimate pleasure into relationships where love runs deep and passion stays hot. Welcome, Joanna. We're so thrilled that you're with us today. The title of our talk today is Love, Sex, and Intimacy: How Singles and Couples Find and Create Soul Partnerships. So there's a deep spirituality that comes with Joanna's work. So I think we're going to hear a lot about that today.
So Joanna, tell me about the saboteurs. What is it that we do that stops us from having the sex life, the love life, or the lover that we so long for?
Yeah. And I could talk about several, but there's two given our topic and focus that really pop up for me. And the first one is, much less entertaining and interesting than the second one might be, but it is the relationship with self. And the saboteur is actually self-abandonment. And I know that I can go back to those early days. I had a guy in college that said to me, "I will not go out with you because you don't love yourself." And I'm like, what? What? Are you kidding me? I'm like, this amazing. Fast forward a few years into my own journey, and I'm like, hey, he was totally right. And so this self-abandonment thing is the ways that we show up to try to make a relationship work. What are they going to think is sexy? What are they going to be attracted to? What is going to make them happy? What's going to make sure that they don't abandon me or reject me? But in that process of trying to make the connection work, we actually create separation. And that destroys love, love. The quality of the relationship with us determines the quality of the relationship. Physical, emotional, spiritual, you name it, comes back to how am I showing up? So that's number one. And then number two is this masculine feminine dynamic that exists within us and between us. What's our relationship from the ancient yin and yang perspective? But whatever, like the energies of masculine and feminine show up across just about every tradition. And if we look at what do those mean, masculine is attracted to feminine and feminine is attracted to masculine. And most of society and most of the world has taught us to neuter and neutralize those energies. And then we wonder why there's not attraction, why it works for a while and then it fades. And it's really, again, it points back to like, who am I in this expression of masculine and feminine? And who is my partner and how do we dance together? But if we're both trying to play both roles all the time, or we're unconsciously in one pattern or the other, it's going to dampen the spark and push us apart in many cases. Those are the two biggest things that I think really sabotage the heart space intimacy and the sexual intimacy.
I really love how you framed the first one. You're like, this one might not be very exciting. Relationship with self, it's like, but once you start going into the journey of relationship with yourself, you find that, oh my God, it's so exciting. And it's really like, it really is the foundational and primary one. I also love the way that you said, this relationship with self it basically colors what the relationship is going to look like with the other. So, really that is such a primary focus. And I guess my question for our listeners would be like, well, how do they know? Like, at what point do they know if they're at a good enough relationship with themselves, or they can then attract the right person who they're not going to go into old patterns with?
Yeah. Well, and they might attract a person that's high
Even still,
success
yeah.
because they do go into that. And that could get into a whole conversation about what a successful relationship is. But setting that aside and really focusing on the question of like, when am I in a strong enough relationship with myself? And it's in the real test. And I actually have out on the website, there's like, I think it's 37 different indicators of self-abandonment, something like that, because we can really look at our habits. But if we summarized all 37 or whatever that number is, it's really, am I putting myself first? Which is counter to almost all the conditioning. If I'm a good partner, I'm putting my partner first. No. If I'm a good partner, I know my needs, my wants, my desires, my turn-ons, my turn-offs, my boundaries, and I can communicate them in a way that is honoring of me and honoring of others. And then we can have a conversation. And oh, by the way, that experience becomes one of ecstatic authenticity. Like, it took me a while to get to the point where I was like, oh, this is really good having a relationship with me. But eventually it feels ecstatic. It feels so good to be me that I don't want to be anything else but me. But as long as I'm putting their needs, wants, desires, and turn-ons first, then I can't actually authentically show up. But if I do authentically show up, then it's the first place that I'll actually trust, love, and trust the relationship.
So good. I love how you're saying this piece around trust, because I'm such a huge advocate of that.
Yeah, and trust has been a real theme throughout
been
the
a
summit.
theme.
It seems like it's come up in every interview. And I think it's because it's so essential. When I think about, I remember being the person you're describing right now who would tie themselves up into a pretzel, was desperate to be loved, who would try to be. I was always trying to think about what was going to keep them interested. How was I going to keep their attention? What was it going to take to get them to really fall in love with me? And it took years before I learned that no one's going to ever fall in love with me if I'm trying to get them to fall in love with me. It's like I had to learn what it feels like and who I am, and to actually like tolerate me, of going, I need to be myself. No one's going to fall in love with you. In fact, you can't fall in love with someone who isn't themselves.
Right.
Right. So then
who are you in love with?
Exactly. And so then the journey begins of it. I think it's not even who am I? I think it's more about just like relaxing into that you're goofy and you're awkward and you're adorable and you're more beautiful than you could ever fucking know. And if you can just take the risk of just being all those things, even the parts of yourself that you're convinced aren't lovable, if you can like expand your tolerance to just let that be okay.
Yes.
I feel like Joanna, like there's like such a resonance here, and Willow too. There's an attunement that we're getting because what we've discovered by taking those risks is that people fell in love with us. It's like, it happened.
It worked.
And I can be my messy, perfect, imperfect human, permission to be human. And boy, I wish I would have learned it sooner.
Absolutely. Me too.
So parents out there, like if there were like a message for parents ever, it is just like really encourage your kids as they're struggling in this path and journey of love, that the most important thing they can be is just their awkward, lovely selves.
Yeah.
That's where love resides.
It totally is. And there's no way that we will ever trust love or another person's love. Like, let's just bottom line it, love itself. If we aren't allowing exactly what you just described, Leah, if we aren't allowing the good, the bad, and the ugly to be seen, and know that even in the places on the body that don't look so good, or the expressions and turn-ons, or the insecurities and vulnerabilities, like all of that. And when we know, oh, they've seen that
Mhm.
and they didn't run.
Yeah.
Oh, they're in. And even if they do run, like for those in the dating space, if they do run, like, thank goodness.
Right.
And it's
Bye-bye.
knowing that if they do, I'm okay and I don't want them. They're not my person,
Yeah.
because I want to live life from this place of relaxation and openness and trust that allows the depth of intimacy and connection.
And so how does then the second sort of saboteur that you highlighted, the relationship between the masculine and the feminine within a single person, because we all have the masculine in us, we all have the feminine in us. How does that support this evolution of self-love?
Yeah. Well, and there's so much making wrong
Mm.
of our authentic masculine and feminine energy. But even before we make it wrong, most of us don't realize what our core energy is. And if you go back 20 years for me, I was in corporate, I was an engineer, I was climbing the ladder in high tech and oil and gas in Houston, Texas in the 90s with the good old boys.
Wow.
I was about as masculine as you could get, and I thought that was my authentic nature.
Mm.
And whether we're talking women or men, and it's anywhere on the gender spectrum, just use the ends of the spectrum to say male or female, but it doesn't matter where we fall in that spectrum. What matters is that we give ourselves permission to be who we are. And especially if we look at the ends of that spectrum, there's been a lot of conditioning that says, don't be feminine, being soft, being expressive is not okay. Being vulnerable in our own minds is not okay. Or the flip side of being too assertive, too direct is also not okay from that masculine standpoint. So then we've got internal shame. We've got internal judgment that says, I can't be that. And so for me, I was completely outwardly masculine, pushing away the very men that I was attracted to. But also simultaneously, part of that was the insecurity of, am I lovable? So let me do the things that I think are going to make me lovable. Let me show you how strong I am. I can compete with you. I can outman you because I'm attracted to masculine men. So, but I didn't realize that in the very process, I was dragging down, emasculating, to use a word, his energy, and then not ending up for either one of us to have what we truly wanted. So it's the permission. And I watch it in masculine beings all the time. I don't want to be that guy. But then they shut down that part that in a consensual, safe relationship wants to put her up against the wall or wants to throw her down on the bed. And she's going, why doesn't he do it? But he's going, I don't want to be that guy. Well, I don't want to be respectful. And so there's such a conundrum of, well, am I even allowed to be myself? But if I'm not being myself, I'm not satisfied.
Oh, I think we get so many mixed messages, right? It's like we've got one person who we've been interacting with who give us we interpret that they don't like a certain part of the way that we are presenting ourselves. And so that informs, or we have a parent who kept putting that part of our natural self-expression down. And so we sort of, in that conditioning, mold ourselves to, like you said, kind of tie ourselves up into a pretzel of what we think someone will love. So how does someone, if someone is starting to recognize that in themselves. There's a part of them that keeps on self-abandoning in order to get love. What would be the next steps if once they've hit, recognition?
Yeah.
What's the next thing? Like, how do they stop?
Yeah. Well, and let's pull these two things together, because we've got self-abandonment on one hand and we've got the masculine and feminine, which is in another form of self-abandonment,
Right.
self-denial.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and again, it doesn't matter if that self-denial is the masculine holding back that assertive or direct nature, or it's the feminine holding back that I really want to be courted. I really want to be ravished. So in that context, or it's the performing or pretending to be the thing that I think will be lovable. Because in both scenarios, we're doing it because we think it's what we're supposed to do. We think it's going to get the results that we want. But in the end, we're always deflated. It's like, well, where am I? And I'm losing myself in this relationship. And then we direct the frustration out there, because we'll even lose sight that we're the ones that are abandoning self. We'll tend to look out there and think they're not showing up instead of working here. So yes, we've identified that in some way or another, we're not connected to self. So what's next?
Yeah.
And
incongruent. You recognize like, I'm incongruent.
Incongruent, inauthentic, or even if we don't say incongruent or inauthentic, it's I'm unsatisfied. Because our satisfaction with what's going on out there will be totally dependent on whether or not I'm actually showing up in it. Because the dynamic between the two is always going to depend on how genuine I'm being. And it's not necessarily the most fun part of the journey, but it doesn't have to take that long. Give it 3 months of some internal looking, and we can change a ton. And I don't care how many decades it's been that we've been self-abandoning, to begin to see all the reasons. We have tons of justification for not being ourselves. We have tons of reasons, but we will do more to stay out of pain than we will to gain pleasure. So we're seeking pleasure. I want it to feel good. I want love. I want the orgasm. Doesn't matter how much you want it. If the other part of you is saying it's not safe, it's too risky, I might get rejected, I might get abandoned, I might get embarrassed, I might feel guilty. And those emotions that we are afraid to potentially feel will stop us every single time. So the internal journey to go, well, am I okay if they reject me? Back to that part. Am I okay if they don't see things the way that I do? Am I okay to say no to this relationship because we have different long-term goals if we're talking for a long-term relationship? Am I willing to say no? Oh, by the way, self-abandonment and boundaries go hand in hand. Hand in hand. They're cousins. They are siblings, and you cannot honor self without boundaries.
They're basically twins.
Yes, that's the best way to describe it. They're basically twins, and they almost couldn't get more related, like twins. So that is the piece that is getting honest here, clearing out all the stories that say it's not okay for me to be me, then beginning to get honest, and then developing the comfort to set those boundaries, to express our truth, to request our needs, to stand for what we want. And that opens up huge possibility.
Yeah, it's those boundaries that really is like good fences make good neighbors, right? It's like it gives the other person, it lets them know where they stand then in relationship to you, which then allows them to feel more safe to bring their authentic truth forward. And this upward spiral starts to be created between the two of you, this trust and vulnerability cycle between two souls. When that, I feel like when that starts to happen, just it opens up worlds of possibility. And that can happen at the beginning of a brand new relationship, or that could happen like into a 25-year relationship after having 4 kids together. It's really
Sure.
possible to create that in any scenario. I think the piece that you're really bringing up that I want to highlight is, again, creating that level of trust inside of yourself. Will I be okay if they don't stay with me because these are my desires and wants and needs?
Yes.
Will I be okay? Finding that okayness inside of yourself.
Absolutely. And on the flip side, and where it gets interesting in the 25-year marriage is if there was a whole lot of self-abandoning going on over those years. Yes, can we shift it? Absolutely. However, every time that we self-abandon, we build up resentment. And resentment destroys attraction. Resentment destroys love.
Sure does.
So if there's resentment, if we've got those edges with our partners, then the opportunity, and again, it's not that difficult. It's just a little guidance, a little support, a little intentionality, and we can clear out those things that have created separation between us, because all those resentments are sitting in between the experience of connection and unity.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another absolute indicator that self-abandonment's going on. If we've got an edge, if we are resentful, even in the slightest, resentment is never about the other person, it's about us.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm back here. And that's the power.
I think that's really interesting. I want to hear you say more about like the relationship of a long-term relationship where one or both partners has continually self-abandoned. But before we cross into that example, I think when you're dating or when you are looking for love and you're noticing that you're not finding it, even though maybe it's here this time, but then it keeps on repeating, right? Like there's a pattern. It keeps repeating itself over and over. This okayness, it's like it takes courage to stand in a place of taking risks and testing some of the insights that you're providing for us today, like testing your tolerance for vulnerability. I think when you test it a few times, one of the things you'll come to see is that you're actually more lovable when you just go, okay, here are my guts. Please don't run away. They're probably not very pretty, but I hope you still like me, because then you realize like people actually, that's what they fall in love with.
Absolutely.
And then it's easier and easier, right?
Yeah, it does get easier and easier.
Yeah.
So for those of you who haven't started on being vulnerable and falling in love with the potentiality of what vulnerability can bring to your life, just know that it does. It's a muscle. And so when you first start lifting weights, you're going to be sore for like a week and a half, but then you're going to get stronger and you're going to be able to lift more and be more vulnerable. And you're going to start to look forward to it. Like, where can I be vulnerable with this person? When you get to that place with it, you've really crossed into a threshold of true self-love, of like, look at how silly and goofy and ugly and, all the things that I used to fear. Look at all these things that I am now.
Yeah. And just watch somebody just go, oh, I love you so much for this.
Well, and we do. I mean, the very first facilitator, long before I ever got into Tantra or anything else, was like, we don't fall in love with somebody's greatness. We fall in love with their humanness, which is their imperfection, which is their vulnerability. And here's the thing about vulnerability. There are so many misunderstandings. I was facilitating with my 3rd level group, which means people have been working with me for a minimum of a year. And we were working with it last month in a new training in that phase 3 program. And the misunderstandings in this group of highly educated and aware and different, aspects of life, but the misunderstandings of what vulnerability is. And so much conditioning that equates vulnerability and weakness. And that I have to be passive. I'm this thing looking up at something else that's great. If I'm vulnerable, I'm somehow small, insignificant, and less than. And that is the last, like, it's so not true. It's the complete opposite. And that the power of vulnerability, when we're not trying to prove anything and we're not trying to get big and we're not trying to get small, we're just being ourselves.
Just being real, yeah.
It's very much a level of realness, and to take it in bite-sized chunks and to choose people that feel like good practice points. So I'll say baby steps, and only if this person feels like they're in a space in this moment. Even if they were in a space a couple of days ago, or we've seen them be in a space with somebody else, maybe they are, maybe they aren't in this moment. So staying with self and choosing, is this the time for me to practice vulnerability? And consciously choosing it. So it's very much about staying in our own power and knowing that vulnerability is power. So we just felt really important that people get confused between having power and being vulnerable.
I think people confuse like vulnerability with humiliation.
Yes.
When we're little kids,
Mhm.
we have these experiences of being embarrassed and humiliated and overexposed. It's
Mhm.
like that vulnerability feels really naked, and it feels like it is out of our control. Something happens to us, and suddenly we are naked in front of a whole group of people, and it's just so shattering.
Yeah.
It leaves an imprint of embarrassment and humiliation. And humiliation is like a really long history in the human brain with survival. You know, you get kicked out of the tribe and now you are on your own. So there's like this real like animal trigger around vulnerability. It's like, I think we need to come up with a new word for vulnerability as adults.
Yeah.
Because the word vulnerable actually translates to woundable, which is why it's so hard, which is why you need to be able to trust someone when you show up in the vulnerability. But what I've come to see, and I wonder if this is true for the two of you, is we can trust more than we realize. As adults, many other adults are more trustworthy than we give them credit for. That we can actually take more risks with each other as our human family. Like, we can put a little more faith in each other's goodness, people. You know, let's kind of do it. Let's separate our separateness and come into a place and actually put an investment in each other that says, I'm going to hold you sacred, and your wounds are sacred to me. And I'm not going to trample on your nakedness right now. I see this as a privilege. I mean, I think both of you, I know personally, know this. This is an instinct. This is a part of your heart, who you are. If someone is vulnerable with you, you treat that with the utmost respect and preciousness. I think most of us are like that. And we need to give people a little more credit in their capability of that, and not be so guarded against, you have to prove that you're trustworthy. You know, it's really like trust opens up over here.
Yes.
And so I want to just, and haven't you noticed, like, now that we're not children anymore, and like the playground hasn't is no longer like this risky, scary place, but like our adult playground, we get rewarded now for our vulnerability, whereas children, it wasn't rewarding. But as adults, it is. No, I'm not saying that there are cruel people out there who are not nice, but they're hurting more than we're hurting. You know, like, putting that aside, you know, I guess I'll direct this to you, Joanna. How do you encourage that kind of risk taking?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of different things. And I'm thinking about some of our weekend retreats, and both the shock of bringing men and women together, singles, couples, and people going, oh, other people have these fears that I have. Other people are as soft as I am, and blown away in less than 48 hours of how close people can come. Now, with that, two things. Well, one thing, and then I'll go to one specific, and that is the container. The container that we set, the agreements that we have with each other, how we're going to hold each other. And in the acknowledgement, this is what I want to point to, is two things within that container is we can trigger each other and we absolutely have judgment. So what are we going to do? Like we are human beings and our minds judge. So no, yes, you are correct that we are not going to, in general, try to hurt somebody. However, our minds go, what? I wouldn't do that. That's kind of weird. Or well, why are they talking so much? Or we'll judge ourselves. Why am I talking so much? Why am I doing this? We talk literally in the first 2 hours of getting together for a weekend, we're talking about judgment of self and other. And then we're also talking about triggers. Because when we start to show up real, is it possible that my realness is going to bring up something in you that makes you feel vulnerable or scared or jealous or whatever the energy is? And what are we going to do in that circumstance? And beginning to realize that our triggers are our own, but we can, through conscious conversation, talk about those triggers and talk about those judgments, or be able to recognize the judgment and set it aside so that we are available to stay in this connection. So container, and there's lots of ways that we could talk about container, but I will always, for people that are getting into relationship, what's your conscious beginningers ritual? What are the things that you do to set that stage of safe container within your relationship? So what do we do with the retreats to set safe container within the space? And then how do you take that out into other relationships so that we can, even when it's messy and even when reaction shows up, still find that sacred space?
That safe container, as you're talking about it, I'm just realizing it's not only within intimate relationships. Like you can create this safe container with your kids. You can create this safe container with your boss, your good friend that you're having a quarrel with or something. Like
Yeah,
it
Thanksgiving
goes,
dinner.
yes, your family, your extended family,
Yeah.
that weird uncle of yours, and so you can really utilize it. And that's one of the things that you wanted to really bring to our conversation today, Joanna, is like, this goes beyond your sexuality and your intimacy.
Totally. And thank you for bringing that in. And that, like, Tantra, for me, in the way that I offer it with people, it's a way of life. It is a sacred. So to bring in what Leah said, it's the sacred and holding that in every interaction with self, with beloved, with potential beloved, with clerk in the store, with children, with parents, with colleagues, and how am I showing up that honors the sacred, that honors this vulnerable human being, this human being that does shit that hurts sometimes, but doesn't do it out of vengeance. And even if they did, and we can set that aside for another conversation, but even if they did, as Leah said, there's pain underneath that. And we can choose to set a boundary and say, I'm not going to be in that space, but we still know there's a really sacred human being underneath that's gone through some shit. And so how do we approach conversations, touch, play, sex, all of it from a place of authenticity, intimacy, and hence ecstasy, because we are honoring the sacred in every moment, in every way. And I also want to say, not about perfection. We don't have to get it right all the time. It's the intention and the energy that we bring to it. I'm going to have conscious interactions with you. And when I mess it up, and we all mess it up, then I know how to clean it up. And that is where I describe conflict or challenge becoming communion.
Beautiful. I love that. It's such an opportunity to.
Yeah, it just makes my heart go.
Yeah, it's when we go into the shadows, when we go into the things that we think, oh, don't go over there. That's repulsive and ugly and not good. I don't want people to see that. And we start to bring it to the light. That's where all the medicine is. That's where all the chi is. That's where we get to like really rise up into who we are as human beings and what gifts we have to offer this community tribe called human and earth.
And I love that you're encasing it in this in the this is our lifestyle. It's not what we're doing in the bedroom. From a tantric place, yeah, we can give you all the tips and tricks and practices and pressure points and breathing and you can orgasm and blah 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 blah. Blah. But that you're missing the boat if you think it's just about pleasure. You know, and
Absolutely.
the word that keeps on coming to me, and I love Willow every time you say chi. I kind of get the giggles because I love how like we all have different languaging for the same thing. Because I was just brought to a memory of Ram Dass, and his message was loving awareness, loving awareness, loving awareness, which is the same thing as like chi, you know. And so
Yeah.
it's this like when we're talking about that person who has carrying more pain, their inability to be in loving awareness is not a reflection of us. This is where we can bring loving awareness to them. And that is a boundary. It's to say, I am bringing enough loving awareness to you to say, go put balm on that pain. But I'm not going to carry that for you. You know, so it kind of comes back to like container, and the way to have a good container is to have healthy boundaries. And I think people get scared of the word boundaries because it sounds like limits. It
Right.
sounds like conditioned love. And we've all been raised on this value system of unconditional love. And you could kind of take a look at like loving awareness as unconditional love, but that doesn't mean you're a doormat. That doesn't mean you tie yourself up into a pretzel as to avoid not looking perfect. You know, so it's all kind of weaving together, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. None of these pieces can be separated, but the common thread is how do I show up and how is loving awareness expressing through me, as me, to me, from me.
Yeah.
And that center point of we hold a space of love for this relationship. And when we can bring, because we're really talking about uniting our heart and our sexuality and our spirit and our soul. And that's really, again, if we want to talk about the greatest pleasure, in my opinion, it's the place that not only can take our body to places that it hasn't been before, but it takes our heart and our emotion and our spirit and our soul to places that take our breath away, that are heart stopping and breathtaking.
So kind of goes back down to this personal responsibility. Like that's where it starts, is kind of where you started off this interview from, you know, that with the whole saboteur piece and to like allow yourself to be yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just want to bookmark that we get to this. It doesn't have to be now, but I want to bookmark this piece about when you are in a relationship for 25 years and you have been self-abandoning in one form or another, and you do have all this resentment, and you're getting this message now. Can you repair a
Yes.
partnership with
Yeah.
that much, let's just call it baggage?
Yeah.
Mistakes, you know?
Absolutely. And I have so many people that show up and it's like, our sex life isn't working anymore. I'm like, okay, let's talk about the rest of your relationship. Because usually, yes, can we expand techniques? Yes, can we learn to breathe? Yes, can we do all those things? Absolutely. And to where you said this, Leah, like that's not going to change anything if we've got all of these other places where we're abandoning self and we've abandoned the relationship. So yes, can we transform that? Absolutely. And what's beautiful is when we learn how to let go of that resentment, it is the same process that keeps us from building it in the future. We just have to, while we're learning to be authentic and communicate from this sacred space and to communicate authentically and to honor self and honor other, without abandoning or demanding someone else abandon themselves. That from that space, what I will describe it as, or how I'll describe it is, it's as if when you got married 30 years ago, whatever it is, there was this big rug in your living room and it was flat on the floor. But then you had these times where it's like, oh, I don't want to be the bad guy. Is it really worth it? I'd have done that anyway. I don't like how she did it, but I'd have done it that way anyway. So is it really worth picking a fight over? I don't know how to say this. I don't like conflict, whatever our story is. So we take that unspoken stuff and we stick it under the rug. And then something else happens and we stick it under the rug and we keep sticking it under the rug. And the rug begins to rise up in the center because there's all this stuff. And now one standing on this side, one standing on this side, looking over the top of that rug going, not tonight, honey. No, not tonight. I don't even know if I'm in love anymore.
They can't even see each other anymore.
I can barely see each other anymore. Exactly. But the love is still there. It's just the stuff in between. And when we start to pull this stuff out, it's shocking how many couples, when we just start to deal with what's unspoken, all of a sudden they want to make love again.
I love it.
It's shocking because now we bring in a dash of vulnerability in saying, oh, it hurt when that happened. I didn't tell you this, but this is what I really thought. And the closeness immediately starts to redevelop. Now, it may take us a little bit of time to get it all out, but that ability to fall in love again, absolutely there. But we can't separate what happens in the bedroom from what happens when we're upset and think we're going to have a happy love life. It doesn't work.
There's incongruence there. That is a really beautiful, I love your just analogy of sweeping it under the rug. You build a beautiful picture. I mean, you can really see it. And then they're just standing on either side of the rug and there's just a pile of crap under the rug. They can't see each other. That's what it is. That's what the loss of love is inside of a relationship. It's not lost at all. It's just buried.
Yes.
I love it.
Exactly.
I love that, like, the urge to make love again arises naturally when you've done the scary thing.
Yes.
When
Yes.
you've revealed having been impacted by something that you've been holding on to, that, like, when you release that. And I imagine that one of the ways that this makes it transition into the urge to make love again is sometimes dependent on how the partner responds, hears, receives. If it's met with their worst fear of rejection, denial, a blow up, I can't imagine that opening you to want to make love.
Right.
There's probably a transition period of allowing all of that to reveal itself and reflection, to have a moment to be with.
Well, it has a huge amount to do with how it's communicated, like the way the words are expressed from the person who's hurting and how the listener hears them. And there is definitely some finesse to that, where it's done in container, it's done consciously. Then it's shocking when it's not about blaming, when it's about revealing, when it's not about judging, but acknowledging. It's very, very different than when you did this. That may well totally create more separation.
So there's really a taking responsibility for
yes,
your own stuff.
There is that. There is a taking responsibility for it. But how we communicate it can, even when that person may go, oh, damn, I did that. I had that impact. Oh, I was a you know what at that point in time. Like, we might have that experience. But it's very different when the person says you were a you-know-what.
Right.
Then the person offers their experience and you have the chance to go, oh, I was the shit. I was not cool in that space. And now I'm going to show up and say, I'm sorry. Not because you're demanding it, but because I'm inspired to offer that acknowledgement. And I want to say something to Leah with that, or what Leah said is there's also a masculine feminine dynamic in this. Huge masculine and feminine dynamic between how we resolve conflict, how we offer and receive, and what's the other word that I want to use? It's really how we end conflict. And that can look very different between two masculine beings, two feminine beings, and masculine and feminine beings together. And so we also it's another piece of the whole that has to play well together. Because if we're not heard, it won't resolve, especially for the feminine.
Yeah, I think there's something really important here that I hope couples can take away from this conversation, and that is learn how to fight well. Learn how to have conflict in a way that matters, because you're going to have it anyways. You know, the most important thing to relationship is not being right. Learning about the value of apology. Even if you don't value, like there's some people who just think saying I'm sorry, it's just not their highest value, you know, where it might be for their partner. And so I think there's so much great work out there around conflict resolution and communication. And if we're and every good relationship better have some good fights in it, because that's how we grow and learn and evolve. So make it count, you know, and I think learning how to speak in I statements and to do the even deeper work around like self-reflecting, you know, what you said to me yesterday had impact, and it reminded me of this time in the past. And then that reminded me of when it happened at another time, at another age. And so I think one of the things that's really powerful when we are feeling hurt and resentful is that it's not usually just that one thing your partner did.
Totally.
It usually is picking at a wound that has happened over and over and over again. And so for us to have the self-reflection to go, and it reminded me of this time, and it reminded me of that time. It takes the attack off your partner, and then they're able to hear that there's a tenderness in you. You know, and then to really love you is to be gentle with that tenderness, and that the impact, this is why the impact is so impactful. And then I think the listening changes, right? It's an interesting thing also, which I think is so hard. I'm wondering what your advice is on this, Joanna, because I think we're all so guilty of someone giving us feedback that's not so pleasant or flattering. And we'd go straight into defense mode or shutdown mode. And it's so unsatisfying for the person who really needs you to get it when you just come back with a defense. So like, how do you learn that skill of being able to receive someone's resentment when you want to just fight back because it feels so unfair?
Yeah. Well, and I would argue first, well, actually, I want to say one thing before I lose it, because this learning to fight well.
Yeah.
And we talked about soul partnerships here. And if two souls are coming together, if this is truly a soulmate, soul partnership connection, then by definition, you are meant to push each other's buttons because you are here to evolve and reveal each other's full soul expression. So soul partnerships and soulmates, they are not about fairy tales and roses. Yes, that, but not exclusively. We will go through those deepest challenges. So now with that, when we're having this conversation and that part of us that wants to come up and defend, that wants to judge and direct back, but you did. Well, this is actually how the masculine, doesn't matter whether it's a predominantly masculine being or predominantly feminine being, but that's the masculine approach. to showing up. We're going to defend. We're going to get hard. We're going to get rigid. We're going to direct back. And in that sense, we want to be willing to listen, but not take it on. So where you said, how can we receive it? I'd actually argue that you don't receive it because it may or may not be accurate. It is their perception.
Right.
But the willingness, and again, this comes back to, am I safe with myself? Am I secure within myself? Because if I'm secure in myself, I can hear your feedback without knowing that it's true. I can check it out within myself. What if there was some validity to what they just said? What might it be? But if we aren't secure within ourselves, if we feel like it is shaming or judging, or that it feeds our inadequacy story or our not enough story, then to protect against that pain, we have to react.
Right.
But what we really want to do, I remember this is close to 20 years ago, and a particular gentleman I was in a relationship with, and I was creating space for his upset. And I was kind of doing it intentionally, and I was kind of just being with him, but I knew enough to create space for his upset. And he was actually accessing something that I knew he hadn't had access to. And I just opened. And he, at one point, I said, I'm here, I'm listening. And he turned around and he went, I hate you. And I was like, okay. Like, it was fine because I knew he didn't hate me. It was his love and pain.
Yeah.
And and when I tell that story, quite often people will go, what? And you were okay? And I was like, yeah, because I knew he loved me, but that was my security and it changed him. When I didn't make him wrong for that, it was not 30 seconds. And he was, I love you.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was
Beautiful.
safe for him to express his pain.
Yeah.
Right.
That's beautiful.
You
And
held
not
that
judge
for him.
But I couldn't have done that if I wasn't secure within myself.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a real blessing. I think that when we can do that for someone, we can see that it's not them, that their reactions are not who they are.
Yeah.
Their reactions are just their conditioning. It's a sum of all our culture's impact on ourselves. And when we can just see that they are not their behavior, and we don't react to it, wow, do they get to bounce back so much faster. I feel like I'm the recipient of that gift quite often with my husband. So really fortunate.
Yeah. And it
Really unique love.
It is such a unique love, and it takes an individual who has that level of self-sovereignty, of self-love within themselves to be able to not drop into a triggered reactive state themselves. I think that's the dynamic that so many couples are struggling with, is it's like they're both just your triggers or triggering my triggers, triggering your triggers. It just turns into a big trigger fest. And so somebody's got to break the cycle.
Right.
And the only person that you have any control over is you. So you've got to find that sovereignty within so that you can do exactly what Joanna exemplified for us so beautifully, of like, okay, you hate me. Fine. That's okay. I see your pain. I see that you're in pain, and I still love you, and I'm still here.
And I hope people can see that that's not a bypass.
Mm-mm.
Joanna wasn't
Right.
bypassing. She wasn't pretending that it was okay. She had enough self energy with the capital S that she didn't take that and let it, go into her and then inform her of something about herself. It was like Teflon. It's kind of like a duck with water down its back. It just kind of shimmies it down. And in that space of love, then her mirror neurons, right? Her ability to know self with a capital S templates that to the other being, so that when we are the recipient of someone's generosity, and it's really honest and authentic and true, It teaches our body, it up levels us. And so we have this capacity to be these like loving spirits of loving awareness, and we can all up level each other. And it's just so cool that the body can do it, without our minds even having to figure it out.
Well, totally. And that doesn't mean that because that day I had that total self-awareness, that some other day I didn't go, well, I hate you too. And
Right.
scenario didn't happen, but not to say that this body never has a trigger. Bull crap. Sure it does.
Yeah.
Sure it does. But one of us who wakes up first, who gets conscious first. And the minute that one of you gets conscious, the dynamic can change. But we're going to have our triggers. And in some days, wide open. Other days, we're going to be messier for a bit. And then you wake up and we clean it up.
It's like some days it's your turn, some days it's my turn.
And I'm always looking at where are you at in your cycle? If I'm dealing with a woman, what's going on with your hormonal levels? What's shaking on the inside of your bloodstream? Because that plays a big role in your capacity to be able to be like, oh, that's okay. I'm with you still versus I fucking hate you too, you asshole.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Are we on top of hormones, are we resourced?
Exactly.
Like it could be the physical body, but it could also be that I'm emotionally and physically taxed. Oh, by the way, super important to pay attention to. And at that point, I'm going to be way more unconscious.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I feel like there's so many interesting big picture pieces happening in this conversation. One that's arising is some of us struggle with feeling our mental wellness always being in rhythm and on track. And there are times like I tend to struggle with moods, right? I can be up, I can be down. It's often connected to my cycle. I can have a lot of self-judgment with myself in regards to that. And so it's like also knowing that we have these lifelong conditioned responses that we can be really hard on ourselves around. And if you're with a partner that struggles, their theme, it's a place where you can bring more compassion and grace. I think also there is an opportunity when someone is giving us some feedback, instead of going, and pushing it away, but to take a pause and go, where are they right?
Yeah.
It could just be the teeniest little place, but can you find it? Because I have found that that can diffuse an argument so fast. There's nothing to argue when someone goes, I can find it.
It always.
I can find where you're right now.
Yeah.
Gotta think about that, babe. Thanks for that. I mean, I don't think maybe it's as big as what you're reflecting back to me, but I can certainly find it. I have to sit with that for a little while.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to fight about.
And it always takes two to tango.
Yeah.
That's right.
Never all the other person's doing. I don't care how much it might seem that way. It is never all they're doing. And that willingness, humility, the vulnerability to say, I'm so mad at what you did. And here's how I contributed.
Mm-hmm.
What ability to diffuse.
Yeah.
When we can own our part.
And then you're really going to get what your goal is out of bringing it up anyway. I mean, when you drop into shame and blame, that never works. Have you noticed? That never works.
Right. And neither does ignoring it.
Right. Sweeping it under the rug.
On the rug.
Don't do that.
Roll off your shoulders until one day you're backed into a corner and you push back, and you should turn around and never walk back again, because at that point it's too late. You've swept it under the rug, like you said, Joanna, so many times that you just got to move out. There's no more space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That rug is taking up the whole damn room.
Taking up the room, and we can still often clean it up.
Yeah, exactly. There's always
so
hope.
Yeah.
This has been such a rich and deep conversation with you, Joanna. We could talk for hours. I think we're going to have you back as a guest on the podcast once that gets rolling. So I would love to hear just final words of wisdom for all of our listeners who are maybe in that place of like, well, it's been a long time and we're not, how do we get out of this?
Yeah, how does someone become a mastery couple or like more mastery over themselves and how they show up?
Self-mastery.
Yeah, self-mastery.
Yeah. Well, and whether it's somebody that's rebuilding or seeking the next relationship, or it's the couple that's been together for decades, it's really the same thing. Like, and I know it's like, we've said it over and over again, and it's this thing that I know I avoided for 15 years easily, that, this thing was self. And I might not fall in love with self right away, but I might start to notice, oh yeah, I said that was okay when it really wasn't okay. Oh, I did that because they wanted to do it, and it really wasn't what I wanted to do. And how interesting, it didn't really turn out the way that I wanted it to. The connection that I was seeking, I didn't really get. And so for those that are seeking and beginning the process of relating, to practice this authenticity, and anything that's in the way, whether it's a fear, whether it's a self-judgment, whether it's a projection, doesn't matter. Then pay attention to that. And there's a gentle self-inquiry that all of a sudden lets us show up. Same thing with couples. When I work with a couple that's been together 30 years, we're coming back to self first, because the two individual sovereign beings are what create the possibility for partnership, which then has the possibility to turn into unity or divine union. But it's the individual in dating, the individual in a marriage, that when they show up genuinely, authentically, whole, imperfect, but contained in sovereign self and offering sovereign self, then all of a sudden we can connect in a way that is something we could have never anticipated. And that's what I like to call best ever relationship. Like, I had no idea we could be this in love. I had no idea we could go to these places together. In the bedroom, in the kitchen, on the trip, in the driveway, whatever. This is a best ever relationship that takes my breath away time and time and time again.
Celebrate that. Yes.
That's
More-
what I
more
want for you.
on
Every
the planet.
person.
Yeah, because if we're all in that, like, what a better world we're going to be living in. We're not going to be, worried about all these silly little things that people get all their panties in a bunch over. So I'm curious about your gift that you're offering to our listeners, Joanna. I'm curious. It's Ecstatic Intimacy Jumpstart Kit. Sounds so intriguing. I'm wondering, does it tie into everything you just said so eloquently? Yeah.
Everything that we've talked about. There's a singles version and there's a couples version.
Oh, cool.
Not that you wouldn't benefit from both, but it really looks at this beginning of relationship with self. It looks at the masculine feminine dynamic. It looks at what are the stages and phases of this journey that allow me to open into ecstasy and the deepest passions. But what are the prerequisites underneath it? And then it invites us into some of our sexuality dynamics, that how do we create that in a more authentic and much more fulfilling kind of way? So 4 parts, either one is going to give you tons of insight into the multiple different dimensions that we've been talking about here.
Oh, good. I can't wait to dive into that free gift. That's going to be fun.
Oh,
Well,
so good to see you, Joanna. Thank
yeah.
you so much.
Such a pleasure to have you. Thank you
Both
again.
of you. Thank you. It's really good to see you again, Leah, and to spend time with you, Dr. Willow. And
Yes, delicious.
All right, everybody. Love, 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 love.
Now, our favorite part, the dish.
Joanna Shakti was in the house at Sex Reimagined.
She sure was. And she brought so much depth and wisdom and like this level of higher consciousness to the conversation. It was deep and rich, powerful stuff.
Yeah, didn't you feel like braver after that interview?
Yeah. I mean, my whole body felt lighter and like more capable, more confident. Like, I
Yeah.
got this. Just really
Right. It made me
empowering.
like want to really examine like where do I not tell the truth, or what is unspoken in my relationship, or what's unspoken inside of me that I'm afraid to admit even to myself, you know?
Yeah. And also, like, where do I give up myself for the comfort of other people? Like, how am I self-sabotaging? She talked about two saboteurs. And, one of the primary ones was this, not taking care of self, taking care of other over self, and how we get so lost in that, how easy it is to really get lost in that. What she calls self-abandonment. So, abandoning yourself, it actually destroys that level of self-love, what I call like even radical self-love, like going beyond, we can think of self-love as like, oh, I get a massage once a month, I go to yoga twice a week,
Right.
that's great.
Self-care is a little different than self-love.
Yeah, that's different. So this deeper, more radical self-love, it's like we are really tuning in to the body and the cells and what's going on. And like when we're going into contraction when somebody asks us to do something versus when we're going into expansion, and being able to voice that and being able to pause. I feel like the pause is so helpful when kind of navigating this self-abandonment thing that we do. Pausing, giving yourself permission to stop long enough to feel into, um, is this a yay or a nay for me? We got to get that discernment factor going. Discernment, small intestine and heart. Remember that? We had a conversation about that.
Yeah. I think, this listening deep within, you got to build that skill of knowing how to really listen deeply from your body, not always from your mind. Your mind can
Yeah.
take you so many places that are like the wrong direction. If you can just like feel into your body and notice some of those sensations, and then learn how to like, it's like you got to do two things. You got to be able to deeply listen to yourself, but that can't be the only thing you're attuning to, because your partner needs deep listening too. I
Right.
think there's like this, we have to sort of be in balance of treating our partner the way we want to be treated. We
That's
all
right.
want to be understood. We all want to have a safe place created for ourselves where we can actually say the things we're really afraid to say, that if we say them, we might not get love.
Yeah.
But she's telling us, take that risk. Be the safe space for someone else to uncover themselves so fully. And in the experiment of that, in the uncovering of your whole soul, that's what is going to ignite some of the best sex possible. But it requires some of this like risk taking with each other,
Yeah.
emotional risk taking. Not the kind that's dangerous, but the kind that gets everything real
Yeah.
fast, and
Yeah.
then real naked.
Let's get raw. Let's get naked. Let's get real. And you really have to, as that one who's holding the space for other to get more raw and vulnerable, you really got to relinquish your judgment. That's a
Yeah.
big, big piece, because that's the reason that so many of us hold our truth inside, because
right.
we don't want to be judged, because judgment then makes this part of us that's wanting to be explored and seen and discovered, it makes it curl and recoil and go back in. And it's like, oh, I'm just not with somebody who I can be all of myself with, which is just so true for so many. And it takes a lot to transition into being in a relationship where you do get to be all of yourself.
Yeah, I think that this is where we have to purposely make the choice to trust. We have to purposely make the choice to trust ourselves, to trust other, and go, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna trust you. And the way that you become trustworthy is not being judgmental, and is having compassion, and really deeply making an effort to understand where someone is coming from and what they're feeling and how they got there,
Mhm.
and why it's important to them. Even if you can't see it, why is it important to them?
Yeah, so
you know?
putting on your curiosity cap, and just
Yeah.
like really putting your own ideas of what that person should or shouldn't be like aside and just sitting with them as a soul, from soul to soul. Like, how can I understand what is important for you and what's true for you? And how can I just, I mean, you don't even have to support. You don't even have to help heal. You don't even have to help. Just witnessing is enough. That's all people really want, is to be seen and acknowledged. And
Yeah.
when they're not getting that inside of an intimate relationship, eventually they move away or they develop some kind of disease in their bodies.
Totally. And I was struck by this sort of idea of our fear of losing love will cause us to do a lot of dishonest things.
Damn right. Yeah,
And
we've all been
so
there.
it's like we have to sometimes just have a reckoning with ourselves on the inside and go, this is here in me, and I'm noticing that it's maybe creating this action or creating a behavior or stopping me from being as fully intimate and real and like as naked, and without that is in the way of having passion. That is in the way of having the sex that we really want. That's in the way of having the love and the intimacy and the depth and the soulfulness, because that is blocking us from
Yeah.
being who we really are. And how do we start to be that courageous? Well, you
Yeah.
call somebody like Joanna Shakti and you ask for some help, because these
Yeah,
are not like skills that are born inside of ourselves. And we've all had,
that's right.
a lot of us have had some pretty shitty role models.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
we have to undo some things and then build up other things. And then
Hmm.
be really compassionate when we realize our conditioning, oops,
Yep.
got in the way again,
Yeah.
and to know that, what your partner, they have their conditioning, and we're all
Right.
at the effect of that. And it doesn't matter how conscious you are, sometimes you're still just going to be at the effect of that. You're going to react. And,
Yeah.
I think the thing is not to expect someone to do something perfectly,
Hmm.
actually, to just know they're going to do it imperfectly, like permission to be human,
Hmm.
permission to be messy, and know and trust that, like, what do you think's more painful? The person who's afraid of losing love and ties himself up into a pretzel and self-abandons and does these things, or the person who that's being done to.
Hmm.
Another example of this is, I was thinking about, I have these friends, and one was married to this man for 20 years, still in love with him, didn't wanted to be separated but never really wanted the divorce.
Mm. Yeah.
And then he ends up falling in love with someone else.
Mm.
And, they drew out the separation for like over 10 years. And
Oh God.
now he's remarried. But the ex-wife will, prevent the newer wife, even though they've been in a relationship now for 10 years. She's really
Right.
not the other woman, but she feels like she's always being put in the other woman.
Uh-huh.
And so when I've coached this friend, I'm like, well, what do you think's more painful? Being the one that's, you feel judged as being like the other woman, even though you're clearly not to everyone else,
Right.
or being the one that can't let go, that's
Mhm.
still holding on, that makes everyone dance around
Yeah.
and have to play all these separate roles.
Yeah.
So when you're feeling really bad and crummy, just remember
Yeah.
the other one's in more pain than you.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can help. Sometimes it can just help you be a little more generous. It gives you a little bit more space within yourself to not be a
Yeah.
victim.
Yeah.
Because it hurts to hurt, and we hurt people, and we all
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah, we do. That's a beautiful example. Really great, actuality point in case. That's and I love that concept of, tuning into your own pain, emotional pain around a situation, or the difficulty of not being able to speak up for whatever reason, due to sexual traumas, fear of being judged, fear of being abandoned, all these different reasons why we don't speak up about these truths inside of ourselves. And just knowing that you're not alone in that pain. There are others who are going through the same exact thing. The thing about pain is it feels so isolating. Feels
Yeah,
like you're the
so
only
personal.
one in the world who's going
Yeah.
through this issue. And I love this example you just gave us of, like, just look around you. sometimes the closest people to you are actually in more pain than you. That draws out this compassionate side of you, which immediately diminishes your own pain. So there's a lot to perspective shift when it comes to creating intimacy and love and a bond and honesty between two souls that is going to perpetuate, a mind blowing sexual reality.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the message here, my biggest takeaway from this interview with Joanna, as we sort of summarize the dish, take the last bite.
Dessert.
Yeah, is to be mindful that like self-abandoning doesn't serve you or your partner or the relationship. It's not what like if we were to prioritize, there's myself, there's my husband, and then there's our marriage. We're in a trinity.
There's three parties involved.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when I self-abandoned, I have this story that somehow it's going to serve the marriage, but it doesn't. It
No.
doesn't actually serve the marriage. It creates it covers up. It actually blocks the love.
Yeah.
And to take the courage to do the thing that's maybe uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
to ask for help,
Yeah.
to find ways to be soft and gentle,
Mm-hmm.
and to say I need some help with this,
Mm-hmm.
and will you help me?
Yeah.
I'm scared to tell you this.
I'm scared to tell you this.
Yeah.
Golden words right
Mhm.
there. I'm
I don't
scared
want
to
to be
tell you.
judged. Can you hold
Yeah.
space?
Yeah.
I need some help with this. I need you
Yeah.
to be my best friend right now.
Yeah.
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 So,
Yep. She really brought it home for us. It's a very,
yeah.
very deep interview. So
Yeah,
I
it
really
made me
appreciated
want
it.
it. Yeah, it made me want to cultivate that even
Yeah.
deeper, even more. Like,
Yeah. Like how much more vulnerable and honest and open can I be within
yeah,
my relationship to the one that I'm practicing with? Because ultimately every single relationship that we're in is just a stepping stone to a higher version of yourself, to a deeper connection to your own inner beloved. And so you might be standing on the stepping stone of your forever partner at this point in life, but it's still a journey in how can you get even closer to that version of yourself that is whole.
yeah, and have like, there is this image that arises around like deep, soulful love making, like
Oh
where
God.
you're just your breath is taken away and you're able to be so like raw and right there. It's beyond
Ooh,
just
it's
like
the
the
best.
friction based, like
Yeah.
passion based, animal based. This is like different type of soulfulness. It's
Yeah.
less raw, but it's raw in a different way.
It's very
It's
raw in
so
a very different
tender.
way. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I guess like I want to like move closer and closer and closer to that. There's something
Beautiful.
reveling about that, but it does take all of you to show up.
Yeah,
So
it does.
here's to all of us showing up. Thanks
Cheers.
for tuning in.
Yes. Aloha.
Thanks for tuning in. If the hosts seem to know what they were talking about, that's because they do. Leah Piper is a tantric sex master coach and a positive psychology facilitator. Dr. Willow Brown is both a Chinese and functional medicine doctor and a Taoist sexology teacher. Don't forget, your comments, likes, subscribes, and suggestions matter. Let's realize this new world together.